Hi all, Ross here, Thomas Classic and Modern. Welcome back to the channel, and this is going to be part 2 of our Classic Mini Gearbox strip and rebuild. So following straight on from our last video, this is now going to contain, hopefully, as I said in the last video, we're doing this sort of on the fly, so it's very difficult to break the videos down. But this will hopefully entail now the removal of the selectors, the bell crank assembly and the selector rods. And we will also dig into some of the inspection of the main gear cluster. I'll probably stop the video there, so the videos won't all be the same length. Unfortunately, some will be longer than others. That's just the way it's going to go, unfortunately. We'll probably then do a completely separate video on the strip, check and rebuild of the diff unit. So we'll contain that as a separate video in itself. But let's see if we can dig in first of all and get the selector mechanisms out of the gearbox. Right, this is where we left things in the last video. We have our stripped casing, or empty casing should I say, and we now need to empty it a bit further so we can do some further inspections and also get this manky gearbox casing cleaned up. So first thing, we need to get these selectors out of here. How we go about doing that is we need to knock out this small roll pin here, which holds this selector onto that shaft. This one here is free floating, and then we'll withdraw that shaft. So I shall grab our roll pin punch and we will get those out. So roll pin punch sits on top there. Tap it down through. All the way out. We can retrieve that later. That'll be in the bottom of the gearbox now. And then I use the same punch just to go through the hole, access hole, and tap that shaft back through. And there we go. There's our selector shaft out. We can then retrieve the selectors. There we go. That's it. Both of those selectors are out. Next thing we do is we need to remove this 9/16 nylock nut off here and take off the bell crank mechanism. And then on every gearbox we build, we knock out the bell crank pivot and make sure that we replace the seal underneath there. Next job, get those out. Nylock nut, and to save retrieving them all singly, what you can do is just pick up the bottom one, which is reverse, and lift the whole stack up like so. So that's the whole thing, the whole selection of bell cranks. We'll go through those in a bit more detail when we come to showing you what to look for in terms of wear and everything. Next job is this selector shaft assembly can now come out completely. So just push it back through. It has to be in the flat position because it won't clear the casing otherwise. So by that I mean that that section needs to be flat like that, not turned around like that as you had it to clear the selectors. Again, pop that to one side for inspection later on. Last thing for us to take out is the actual bell crank pivot itself, which is this here. Wind the nut back on to protect the threads. just like so. Then you need a decent sized punch and knock that down through and out. And you can just see, hopefully I can pick that out. Just give me a second. You can just see on the bottom of there, that is the small O-ring seal that comes off there. We replace that on every gearbox rebuild we do. Matter of course. That is that. That casing is now fully stripped, aside from the idler gear bearing to come out. We're now going to put that through our cleaning process. That will involve a steam clean of all the aluminium components. So this casing, diff casing, speedo housing, diff side plates, we'll steam all of those off. They'll then go into the degreasing tank. Once that's done, they'll then go through our blasting process. Either vapor blasted or dry blasted, depending on what finish the customer is after. This is a standard rebuild. We're not doing anything with the engine, so this is just in for a gearbox rebuild. So in this instance, this will be dry blasted, etch primed, and then painted with aluminium silver paint. So that's that taken care of. What I will point out just before we ship this off to one side, one thing to certainly look for if you're doing this yourself is this face here. This idler gear face can get very badly chewed up if you've had an idler gear bearing go or something like that. So look for any damage around this area. We'll fully inspect this casing anyway once it's all cleaned. So we'll inspect things like the sump plug thread. All the threads will be chased as normal. If it needs any helicoils, we shall fit them. The other thing I will just point out that I just thought of to watch for as well is this little nubbin here. That is where the countersunk screw comes through from the speedo housing. Yeah, so watch for that, because we have seen a fair few gearboxes of late where people have put the wrong bolt instead of the countersunk screw back in, and it will snap off that little nubbin. Right, I'm going to get all of these aluminium casings off to one side now, and we will carry on with showing you some of the areas to inspect on the gear cluster itself. So casing done with. Okie dokie. This is our main gear cluster out of this gearbox. So I shall take a little bit of time and show you some of the things that we look for now, or what you should be looking for when you are stripping one of these gearboxes in terms of wear. So if we start as, if you like, it would have been assembled, or as it was assembled, should I say, before we took it out. That is pretty much how it would have been in the gearbox. Okay, ignoring the fact that it's not laid out fully correctly, but as it would have been. Areas to watch. Deal with the lay gear first of all. Obviously, the first thing you need to inspect is the teeth. Make sure that there are no damaged, chipped, badly worn teeth. By that I mean you can see some lines running down the side of the teeth or that sort of thing. Check that on all of them. Other thing to check on these is the thrust faces are good. So this area here and this area here, check there is no damage or anything to those. And the other thing to check is the internal bore. So where the little roller bearings sit inside that bore, both ends of the shaft. Okay, so they are areas to look for from that point of view. Pop that to one side. Main gear cluster. As this gear comes out sort of first of all, so to speak, this one there, and in here, this is your third and fourth selector hub, okay? We shall remove that. I shall take that out. That's third gear bolt ring, ignoring that for a second. So this is fourth gear. Let's deal with fourth gear first of all. The process is pretty much the same for all of the gears. Doesn't matter whether it's on the lay gear or the main shaft. First thing to check for is damage. So chipped teeth on the main part of the gear is a big one, as is wear in the valleys and wear on the crowns on the top. Same again, check for damage, pitting, scoring inside the main bore in here. And then this is where you start to check things with a bit more detail, as in if you've got an issue with what gear. So this is the bearing that actually sits inside there. Yeah, those bearings, some people reuse them, and they can be reused if they are in known good order. However, personally, I like to always replace them. From my point of view, they are too cheap not to replace and have to worry about. So again, all of our gearboxes have these roller bearings replaced. So I'm not really going to show you how to inspect that because I don't bother. Next thing to check is the selector teeth, dog teeth, whatever you want to call them. These are the teeth that actually help with your selection of gears. So you need to look for damage, chipping, and the other thing to look for on these is rounding off. So they should be fairly sharp of a profile. And that sharp profile helps them to guide into the corresponding outer ring of the synchro hub. So if you imagine you have two opposing triangles, as the bolt ring slows down on the cone there, which I'll show you in a second, it helps these two to line up and slot into each other. So they're an opposing tooth pattern that helps each other in to each other to select. That can cause problems with crunching, even though your bolt ring is gripping tightly. So they are another thing to look for. Make sure that all of these dog teeth select on the outer selector hub have a nice sharp profile to them. The tops of them, the sharp profile is not rounded off. They do wear, and they are quite expensive to replace. And the more and more we are seeing of them that have had crunchy gears for a long time, these bear the brunt of it. So that is something to look for, and obviously it's on both sides. So the third and fourth side, the third gear side, the fourth gear side, and the first gear side, and the second gear side. So this selects both ways, two different gears. I'll show you how we go about stripping these down, and we'll probably get some close-up photos of an inspection on one of these as well. Might be a little bit better than some video footage. I can redo that. Right, okay, so fourth gear bolt rings. Everyone's favorite Achilles heel of a Mini. So this is our fourth gear bolt ring. This is our fourth gear. So that sits on there. And you can see we have a very small gap between that dog face and the bolt ring. Okay, so that gap there, generally, I say anything less than 35, 30 thou is too much less. Okay, so the closer that bolt ring is up the cone, the less effect that bolt ring is going to have on this shaped cone of gripping that gear and slowing it down, which is how it works. That bolt ring rides up the cone, the selectors push it over, yeah, rides up the cone, slows it down enough for those dog teeth to mesh and glide into each other. That is fairly poor on there, if I'm honest. I can still twist that. Generally, if you've got a good grip on there, you can put some downward pressure on them and they pretty much won't turn. But that's just worn out. Other thing to note in the same area is this face here. Let me just wipe that off a second. Okay, so this face here is your grip face, okay? So this face is actually molybdenum coated, okay? Moly coated, which helps with the grip and the wear. You have to watch on these later gears, they do wear through the coating. Whether it's because the bolt rings were harder than the coating or the coating wasn't up to standard, whether it was down to the change in 1040 oil, I honestly don't know, but they do wear through the coating. So that is one of the things to look for. Now, this one is actually quite shiny. Now, I would suggest that there is probably an element of coating wear on that gear, but we will have a look at some of the other gears and see if any of those are like it as well. So that's a general overview of what to look for on a gear. Doesn't, as I say, doesn't matter which gear it is, you're checking for the same thing on all of them. Okay, so this is now third gear. This is third gear. And that is third gear bolt ring. Straight away, I don't know whether it'll pick up in camera, but this face is virtually mirror finish. You can see that that is very, very shiny. That has lost pretty much all of its coating. That is well worn. This is third gear bolt ring. And third gear bolt ring sits right up tight to the dog. So that is no good. No grip whatsoever on that bolt ring. What I'm just gonna do, I'm gonna grab a brand new bolt ring. Okay, so this is a brand new standard bolt ring. Not competition or anything like that, standard bolt ring. So that sits on that gear about there. Do you see what I mean about the large gap that is present now between the dog gear and the bolt ring itself? That is what helps you with your selection. However, that bolt ring doesn't grip on that cone. I can probably, even with some quite severe pressure, that direction on that cone, that bolt ring is not gripping. That gear is going to need replacing. So this is a brand new second gear. So it doesn't matter that this is second. So second gear, yeah, brand new bolt ring, the distance that it sits, and I can't turn, just about turn that bolt ring on that gear. Yeah, well, that is doing its job. That bolt ring is gripping on that cone, effectively slowing that gear down and allowing it to select. So I'm afraid, straight off the bat, we need third gear. So swap the other end, because to take these two gears off, there is a little bit of work to do. So I will show you that, and you might enjoy that bit of the video, because it'll either take me 30 seconds or 3 hours. First gear. Needle roller that sits under first gear. Again, in every one of our gearboxes, those gears are replaced. There's one under there under first gear, and there's one each under there under second and third. Yeah. So this is our first gear bolt ring and our first gear. So this is, again, quite a shiny surface on first gear. A little bit of surface breakup on that one as well. So, but first gear bolt ring sits fairly well. So there is a fair gap there. But yet again, there is no grip. No grip whatsoever. I'm pushing down hard on that. There's no grip on that bolt ring. Even though there's a good gap, there's no actual grip. I should just try it with a new bolt ring, and it's the same. It's the same. Yeah, so I'm pushing down quite hard on that, and I can still turn that gear. I think we have uncovered, which is not unusual, unfortunately, with these later sport packs, a bad set of gears. So I think you might find that this is going to need a complete replacement set of gears. And it's probably all down to this moly coating. Okay. Already the plot thickens, and hopefully you might see why it is fairly difficult to quote for anything until you start to strip it these days. So what I'm going to do now is, in order to get this first and second selector off, we need to get this top hat off to pull that selector off. Just pop it in a vise and I'll just lever that off. Sometimes they're tight, sometimes they're not so tight. So let's get that done. So, aluminium soft jaws in the vise. You don't need to grip it tight, you're not hanging off it. And how I do this, simply 2 screwdrivers opposite. And it is quite tight. There we go. That's off there. Some of those slide on there nicely. Others are a little bit tight, like that one was. So remove that top hat. You can quickly check that there's no damage on that face. That is where that needle roller runs. Yeah. So quickly check that. Pop that to one side. And then first and second selector lifts off. Okay. And this is second gear is left on here with its original bolt ring. So we'll take a quick look at first and second selector hub. Same thing as before. So we're looking for rounded off teeth on the top of these selector hubs, synchro hubs, on both sides, first and second. And that, you see how that's not really giving any positivity of how it's holding itself in gear. This is the one that it did jump out of gear when we tried to undo the torque on the big nuts. Yeah, so that might well be rescued with new balls and springs. That will probably go again, and which is a good thing. And the reason I say that is I believe last going off these are knocking on for 200 quid. They're very expensive. So I will give all this a good clean up, put some new balls and springs in it and see what it feels like. If it feels okay, I'm sure that'll go again for the customer. Okay, so we now have second gear. Now, interestingly, this was the one that the customer had complained of having difficulty selecting and crunching and so on and so forth. And again, the bolt ring is right up tight to the dog. Okay, so that bolt ring, again, not doing anything. Can turn that free and easy on there. Should take that off. I will just offer up a new bolt ring straight away to that gear. And you can see that sits well up the cone. But yet again, no grip. I'm pushing down quite hard on that gear, and I can turn that. I won't say I can turn it with ease, but I can turn that fairly easily. So I think if I wipe that off, we'll probably find the same. You might pick it up on camera, you might not, but both of those faces, very shiny, with no real surface coating left to them by the looks of it. Just grabbed this one out of my spares drawer, just to try and show you the difference in colouring. So you see how this one is very, very light and shiny, and this one is a little bit darker. The darkness is the moly coating. Yeah, so the moly coating has worn off these gears. This one is one of the ones that we removed, that it's just starting to, again, you might not pick it up in camera, but it's just starting to break up, and the surface is quite scratchy and rough. So that is generally how that finish starts. So it'll start to pick up, and obviously as the bolt ring is running around it, it's picking up the bits of the moly coating, and then eventually it's causing no grip. So we are certainly going to need a set of gears here by the looks of it. Other thing to look for in this main shaft, same again, have a look for any damage or pickup on the end here. This is where the little needle roller bearing sits for top gear. So just look on the end of there, make sure there's no pitting or pickup or anything like that, or again, chips, damage, stuff like that. Same throughout the main shaft, and also inspect these threads and this area here very well. They have been known to break there. It's a bit difficult to see whether there is any damage there, but obviously, you know, just pay close eyes on that area and the thread again. Other thing as well is to check that these teeth here that locate the selector, check there's no pickup or wear up and down those areas, or any burrs or anything like that on the top. So that is everything to do with the gear inspection. What I will just show you as well, seeing as we are here, is the lay shaft. Another area of inspection. Again, we generally term these as a consumable item, because for the cost that's involved, they're not that expensive. But areas to look for is, you see this shiny spot here? Yeah, that's normal, because that's where a bearing runs. Yeah, so that's pretty That's pretty normal wear. Yeah, where a bearing runs, that's not a problem. Again, as long as there's no pickup, any marks or anything like that. This here, these marks are where this section of the gearbox sits in the aluminium casing. So you will always generally get those marks there. Again, just check that it's not excessive and there's no major pickup. And the opposite end, this is a great example. So these marks here, yeah, perfectly normal. They're just the marks where the bearing is spinning. However, that is not normal. That is bearing pickup. So hopefully you can see that in the video. Yeah, so that's fine. That's fudged. So that lay shaft, not going again. Okay, so that is one of the things to look for. So I'm quite glad actually that that's cropped up in this video, because it's nice to be able to show people these things as they come apart. So yeah, definite lay shaft pickup there. Another thing to check for, these are the thrust washers that sit on the end of the lay shaft. Check that there is no excessive wear in these areas here where they touch the gear. So this is the thrust face. This is the face that sits up against the gearbox. That doesn't wear at all. But these can sometimes take a little bit of a battering. There is a clearance to check on these, and I will show you how we do that when we come to the rebuild side of things. And the same with that one. I've seen these in some hellish states where the bearings, the little needle roller bearings, have jammed out and scored all of these faces up. Another little thing to note. Selectors. These are another area of wear that you need to check. Easiest way I find to check these is get your relevant selector hub for whichever selector you're checking. In this instance, 3rd and 4th. So 3rd and 4th selector hub has no gears running around the outside of it, okay? Just does 3rd and 4th gear. Drop it into your selector hub, yeah, and check how much movement you have in the selector, and the wear occurs, if you can see it in camera, apologize if you can't, in these points here, yeah, all the way around there. If you imagine that outer rim there, yeah, is spinning around in this selector, and that selector is what pushes that section over to engage your bolt ring, okay? So that is quite a hard work little part in a mini gearbox. And in all honesty, 3rd and 4th generally tends not to wear too much. That one is a little bit sloppy, if I'm honest. So 1st and 2nd synchro hub is the one with the gears on the outside, because this actually needs to do reverse gear as well. So it does 1st and 2nd and reverse. So that one with the teeth on is your 1st and 2nd selector. Sorry, your 1st and 2nd synchro hub. This is your 1st and 2nd selector. So again, you can probably see before I drop the selector in there, you can see the points at which these wear. Yeah, so right the way down through there, and right the way down through there. So these faces here, these thrust faces if you like, run up against these thrust faces here. Same again, drop it in and see how much play you have. And that is too much. And that's there where it's quite well supported. And that is there where it's on the outer finger. So that is too much wear for one of my gearboxes. So here we have a brand new first and second selector from our good friends at Mini Spares. And that is what it's like in a new selector. Yeah, just clearance, as you can probably see, just a very, very small amount of clearance, both sides. Yeah, from my point of view, £100, yes, it's an additional expense, but unfortunately, when you've got something like that can't be reused, you haven't got a choice. So, new first and second selector needed for this gearbox. This is toast. This, unfortunately, is going to be an expensive rebuild.
Yep.
Little bit more where to look for. Where to look? Where to look for? I know what I mean. So these are your bell cranks. These are the bits that the selectors sit into, that operate on the shaft for the selector. Probably not explaining that very well, and I will explain that better when we come to put it back together, when everything is nice and spick and span and clean, and you know, you can see how things work a bit better. But for the purposes of this one, we are looking for wear. So this is our gear selector pivot shaft, if you like. I'm not sure what the real terminology is for this, but so first thing to check is that it slides through nice and easy. Yeah, we have seen these bent, and they bend here where there's material removed. This, incidentally, is where the little detent ball sits that I showed you in the strip down video. So we have seen people, they've been trying to knock the roll pin out of the selector, and they've bent these and all sorts, causes all sorts of damage. First thing to check that it slides through the center of it nice and easy, which this one does, no problem at all. Second thing to check is make sure that this selector nubbin, new word of the day, nubbin, okay, is secure. And by that I mean they have been known to twist in there, causing selection issues. Lots of people, particularly some of the race guys I know, make sure that these are solid, and then they clean these up and they weld that hole up on the back there just to give it a bit of extra security. But what I do with these, I put them in the vise and just give it a wiggle and make sure that it doesn't twist on me. Don't go swinging around on it, because it will twist. But you just want to make sure that that's fairly solid in there. That one is, it's fine. They have been known to work loose and cause all sorts of issues. Next thing to check is that there's not excessive wear on these points here. So there and opposite there, because that is the bit that sits in there and operates these bell cranks, okay? So that is how they operate. You do have a certain amount of slop in them. They are not a fit, because obviously they work quite hard, and they also work through a range of motion. Obviously, if you imagine this is sliding in and out parallel, and this is then rotating around it. So always good to check that there's nothing wrong with these. So that's another area to look for in terms of wear. These reverse gears have been known to cause problems in the past, and generally it is because this bush in the center of here has warped. Not normally so much of an issue with the single piece bush, which this is, normally an issue with some of the earlier two-piece bushes, where they are two separate bushes pushed in either end and a big gap in the middle. So One thing that I always like to check is that A, there's not excessive wear or float in that shaft to bush clearance. This one there's not. And also check that that bush hasn't moved and it is still nice and flush with the end of the gear. If that bush has walked, that bush gets replaced and we then machine that bush to size, giving a slight running clearance of about 2 thou on this shaft here. But as it happens, this one looks all okay. And that's reverse gear. And I think that's a bit of an overview of general wear and tear to look for inside. Okay, there we go. I probably missed something going along that, and you're probably fed up with hearing me waffle on, but I hope that gives you a little bit of an insight into what we certainly look for when it comes down to the wear and tear inside of these gearboxes. Also hope it shows you some of the things you can come across. We have had people before sort of questioning why we replace so many items in a gearbox when it seemed okay. For example, this customer hasn't said any issues about third gear at all, but as we've just seen, it's pretty bad. So I'm going to leave that there as the second part in this series. Hope it's working out okay so far for you. Any questions, by all means, fire them down in the comments. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for being patient with us, for not getting some of these videos out of late. We are extremely busy as always, and we're ever grateful for it. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. We'll catch you again soon.